Well, hello. Look at this crowd, Lawrence. Look what you did.
Unbelievable.
Look what you did. I had to bring this bag up here because I have all sorts of quotes and things I want to pull out of this fantastic book that kept me up at night. It's so darn good. It is fantastic. A lot of people have been waiting for this, Lawrence. A lot of people have. What have you been up to these past years?
My very patient editor, Iris Tupholm's, especially been waiting for it, as it's only about 3 years late, but we won't talk about that today.
So Yvonne had mentioned that it is so topical because The Illegal is a refugee story. And Lawrence and I were speaking a little bit earlier in the green room, and I said, you know, I cover news every day, and we're seeing in Europe right now various stories. But really, I felt that nobody paid attention to those stories until we saw a 3-year-old boy named Milan wash up on the shores of Turkey, Syrian boy, in his leather shoes and his perfect haircut and his clothes, and the world took note and said, okay, refugees have a face, they have a story, they have a life, and this is it.
And they could be me or they could be my child.
They could be me or they could be my child. The Illegal focuses on Keita, a so-called illegal. Tell us a little bit about your main character.
Well, his name is Keita Ali, and he's actually the son of a character who's run through 2 earlier novels of mine. My first novel, Some Great Thing, and the second novel, In the Known Blood, had a minor character in both novels called Yo-Yo Ali, and he's a journalist from Cameroon who's living in Winnipeg or in Baltimore, depending on the novel. But Keita Ali is the son of Yo-Yo, and he's from a country that's going through a lot of upheaval. We can get into that, and he has to flee that country. He has to flee the violence in that country, and he comes as an undocumented refugee into a new land where he's not welcome. So he's a lot of things, but he's a son and a brother and an elite runner, and he's an undocumented refugee living in a nation that's determined to ferret him out and deport him.
Ironically enough, Freedom State is where he lands, and I thought, how ironic it's called Freedom State and not so free.
Yeah, well, a couple years ago I went on book tour with the Book of Negroes to France as it was translated and brought out in French. Moran and I went to Paris, and in the time that I was in Paris touring with the French translation of the Book of Negroes, there were, the first run of presidential elections were going on in France, and the Front National won 17% of the popular vote in that first presidential vote. 17% of the popular vote of France going to a far-right party that's devoted to getting rid of immigrants and refugees. It was a staggering percentage of the popular vote, and so it was a pretty sobering statistic. And it just so happened that we were there, so I was reading the French papers when we were there, so it was been on my mind. This idea of a nation that could really become one of the most powerful nations of the world, could become openly hateful to the very idea of refugees in their land.
I want to get back to Keita for a moment and this idea of running, because he has aspirations to run for his country. His whole being is about winning in the Olympics and running and doing this and making his family proud and his country proud.
Well, Keita comes from this country called Zantoroland, the entire geography of this novel is made up. The country that he flees and the country that he comes to. He flees his native country called Zantoroland, which is a tiny island, a mountainous island in the Indian Ocean, which is witnessing rising but internationally unrecognized genocide against a certain ethnic group of which he's a member. And it's one of the very poorest countries in the world, and it has the dubious distinction of producing the fastest marathoners in the world. So Keita is from a marathoning nation that venerates its elite athletes. Its elite athletes might win the first 6 spots in the Boston Marathon. They totally dominate the world marathoning community, and so he's from this country, and he's not the fastest runner from Xantorland, but he's in the top 6, and he has to flee, and so he takes his legs with him, and he uses those legs to stay alive in Freedom State. He's on the run. He's not running for Olympic glory. He's running to flee being caught and deported to a certain death. If he's caught and deported, he's running to make money because he enters local road races and scoops up the meager pots that are offered if you win a local road race in this country, Freedom State. And he's running to put together money to try to help his sister who's been kidnapped, and he's got to put together a ransom to try to pay her ransom.
Okay, so hold that thought for a second. And a couple of months ago, Lawrence did an interview with Active Life magazine. I came across it, and there's just a little paragraph that I want to read, okay? And the reporter says to Lawrence, he wants to talk about his youth and the lessons that he learned. And so one of the hardest lessons he'll learn when he was young was that the philosophical nugget, you can achieve anything you set your mind to, is in reality not true. And here's the quote from Lawrence. He says, "When I was a child, I dreamt of Olympic glory. I trained like a maniac. I ran and ran and ran every day through snow, ice, rain, and the blazing heat. But there's some things you cannot achieve, even though you try and train as hard as you can. You can give it your best shot, but then you have to adjust and mature around the realization that you won't always reach your goals. I took that passion for running and transferred it to writing, which worked out for me."